Hello, everyone. With the dust settled on the presidential election of 2024, and now with the presidential inauguration on the horizon, I wanted to take this opportunity to go over some of the most historically significant presidential inaugurations. And I wanted to also take this opportunity to talk about the history of the US through this very symbolic presidential inaugurations and basically, from this gauge, more or less, what can we expect from the presidency of Donald Trump, right? So let's get started, right? So if you want to talk about the most symbolic presidential inaugurations, and if you want to go through this history of the U.S. through presidential inaugurations, you have to start with the first one, right? And the first one, of course, is George Washington, and it's probably the most symbolic one because for Washington, it symbolized the beginning of the American experiment, right? Remember, Washington's presidency symbolized the first time that we have the people, right, choosing the president rather than a monarch, right? So this is the beginning of the American experiment, right? So this American experiment in which, the government is only has power through the consent of the governed, in which the president is chosen by the people and it's guided by the Constitution. This is the first of its kind, right? So Washington's inauguration symbolizes the beginning of this American experiment, all right? So this is the beginning. From there, the second one, the that has to be there and that it's very symbolic is Jefferson's, right? So our third president, his inauguration becomes very symbolic because this is still the American experiment. However, this is the first true test of the American experiment. And why do I mean this? Because you need to remember that this is what people call the bloodless revolution of 1800, right? The political campaign that Jefferson and Adams ran against each other really almost destroyed the nation, right? So Adams was the president, and when Jefferson defeats him in 1800, a lot of people really doubted, if this could survive, right? Like, basically, how is this gonna go? Adams being a Federalist, Jefferson being a Democratic Republican, and basically the idea was, is this going to be a peaceful transition of power, right? Is Adams going to relinquish his power peacefully and give it to his political rival? Right, so it happened, and it basically showed that this was a very stable American experiment, right? So these are the first test of the American experiment, and surviving these two inaugurations is what basically sets the tone for the American experiment work, right? So from the election of Thomas Jefferson in 1800, we need to jump to the election of Andrew Jackson in 1828, right? This marked a shift in the political culture in which we don't have this very much Jeffersonian vision of the government being the power of the elite. And now we have a very Jacksonian vision of the government is for everyone, right? Jackson symbolizes this idea of, anyone can be president, all right? Even someone who's a self-made man like Andrew Jackson, the presidency, the government, the vote is for everyone, right? And nothing symbolizes this the most as not the inauguration exactly, but the reception when Jackson becomes president. He invites the people, all right? So there's about 20,000 people that go to the White House for this reception, all right? So this is, the biggest it ever was. To give you a little bit of context, the biggest reception before Jackson was James Madison's, in which he invited about 400 people. Right, so Andrew Jackson basically thinks that this is the presidency of the people, and everyone is invited. Right, so 20,000 people go to the White House, and they basically wreak havoc out there. Right, but it also symbolizes this idea of the presidency is for everyone. Right, the president represents everyone. Okay, so this is also a very symbolic time in American history, right? Because we shift from a presidency of the elites to a presidency of the people. So you can already see that these presidential inaugurations are not just symbolic, but they're they're actually marking very important moments in American history. And if you're paying attention, you can see how these inaugurations are shaping the future of the nation. So from the presidential inauguration of Andrew Jackson, we need to jump forward to the presidential inauguration of Abraham Lincoln. So this is probably the most important presidential inauguration in the history of the U.S. I'm not saying it just because Lincoln is my favorite president, but because this is the lead up to the Civil War, right? And the Civil War is possibly the most important event in the history of the U.S. And this presidential inauguration sets the tone for what the Civil War will look like, right? So think about it this way. When Lincoln wins the presidential election in 1860, there's 34 states, right? But by the time of his inauguration in March of 1861, there's only 27 states left, right? Seven states have seceded, and Lincoln is put in a position of how are you going to handle the secession? So Lincoln sets the tone for he's only interested in the beginning of bringing the Union together, right? He sets the tone for reconciliation. He sets the tone for the early years of the Civil War, in which it is very clear that Lincoln is only interested in bringing the Union together, and he's not yet become, the great emancipator. At first, through his inauguration, you can see that he's interested in bringing the Union together, and he's left with a puzzle that no president has had to deal with, right? How do you bring seven states that have just seceded into the Union, right? So you go to the second inauguration of Lincoln, and now you see that we're very close to have won the war, right? So it is March of 1865. The war is almost done. To put it into context, the war is going to be over about a month later, and then a week after that, Lincoln is going to be assassinated. But by that time, when Lincoln wins the election and he takes on the inauguration, the war is almost over, and now he sets the tone for Reconstruction, right? It is probably one of the most symbolic presidential inaugurations. This very famous quote from the second inaugural address, with malice towards none, with charity for all. And, it basically sets the tone for reconciliation. You can see that he has no intention of punishing the South in Reconstruction. You can see that Lincoln is trying to win the peace. And these two inaugurations really showcase how the war played out, right? At the beginning with the first inauguration, you can see Lincoln trying for reconciliation and just bringing the Union together. By 65, 700,000 people have died. And, Lincoln, rather than wanting to go and punish the South because he knows he's going to win the war, he's actually going for reconciliation, right? He's actually going for winning the peace. Okay, so this is why these two inaugurations of Lincoln are probably the most important. And if you really pay attention, you can see how it set the tone for the Civil War and then for the Reconstruction. So this Lincoln's inaugurations are extremely symbolic, right? Because you could argue that the Civil War is the most important event in the history of the U.S. And the country that we know and love today is born out of the Civil War, right? This perpetual fight for equality, this perpetual fight for, this is a country for everyone, trying to fulfill the ideas represented in the Declaration of Independence. This is born out of the Civil War, right? So Lincoln's inauguration, especially the second one, symbolized this idea that we're now a new nation, right? We're this new nation of equality, and that's what we're gonna be striving forward from now on. And now, probably the last symbolic presidential inauguration that tells the history of the U.S. is the presidency of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, right? The first and the second one, right? The first one, I mean, because it's the first New Deal, and is this new kind of like this new covenant between the people and the government, right? So, what this New Deal symbolizes is that we now put the trust in the hands of the government, right? We leave this old Jeffersonian rugged individualism vision of the government is out of our lives to switch to this idea, to switch to this new social contract of now we put our faith in the hands of the government. We are going to start giving a little bit more power and responsibility to the government with the expectation that the government is going to look out for the best interest of the people. right? So you need to remember that when FDR became president, it was during the Great Depression, right? So during this time of crisis, the people looked out for the government, right? So with this expectation of we cannot do it all on our own, we're now putting our faith in the hands of the government and give it more power so they can look out for the best interest of the people, right? So that is the first inauguration, and the second inauguration is very symbolic because this is the first time that we switched the date, right? We switched the date from March 4th to January 20th, right? So this becomes very important because we used to have these elections in November and then the inauguration in March, and that's about 5 or 6 months of difference. And in the past, it made sense because technology wasn't there and people took a long time to count votes. So it made sense to take all that time before all the dust settled and we had an inauguration. But by the 1930s, it didn't make sense anymore, right? We could make all that happen before January 20 and just have the new president take action, as soon as possible, right? So when FDR becomes president, in his second term, we have this new 20th Amendment that make it happen that now we take the inauguration on January 20th. All right. So these are basically the most symbolic presidential inaugurations that kind of drive the narrative of the American history. And there are other very important things that happen during inaugurations, particularly very important quotes. Like for example, during FDR's inauguration, the whole "there is nothing to fear but fear itself." Um, Also, this country needs action and action now. It's also FDR. We have John F. Kennedy's, ask not what this country can do for you, but what you can do for this country. So there's been a lot of very important quotes. Been a lot of very important moments. But I believe these are the presidential inaugurations that kind of sort of drive the history of the U.S. to this point. And now we come to the present with the second inauguration of Donald Trump. Uh, Depending on how the next 4 years play out, this could turn out to be another historic inauguration. Uh, Trump has vowed to do a lot of things, right? He's already talking about mass deportations, about tariffs, about getting back the Panama Canal, about possibly buying Greenland. Uh, he has a lot of vision, right? Whatever you want to say about Trump, I'll tell you this, he'll try to do a lot of things for good or for bad, right? But he won't be a non-consequential president, right? He will try to do a lot. Um, I don't know how much he'll be able to accomplish, but what I can guarantee is that the next 4 years are gonna be a roller coaster, right? There's gonna be a lot of things going on, be it because of the tariffs, be it because of the proposed declaring the Mexican cartels as terrorist organizations, be it because he's gonna be feuding with Canada, whatever it is, uh, there's gonna be a lot of things going on. Again, I don't think he's gonna be non-consequential. He's probably gonna try to do a lot of things. You know, Again, he's vowed to do this. War against the deep state. He's trying to reduce the cost of the government. He'll try to do a lot of things. So again, depending on how this next 4 years go, you know, this could be another historic inauguration. Sometimes when I hear Trump talk, he reminds me a little bit of Theodore Roosevelt. They're not similar, but I mean in the sense of being very practical, right? They both have this very ambitious leadership style of trying to do a lot, right? So, for good or for bad, we'll see how it plays out in the next 4 years. And I don't know, guys. Let me know what y'all think. This is all I have for y'all today. I'll see you guys around and be safe. Okay, see y'all.